You're listening to Across the Pondcast. Cybersecurity rants and war stories from both sides of the Atlantic.
Hello and welcome to Across the Pondcast, a show where we talk and occasionally rant about cybersecurity topics with perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic. I am Tib3rius. I'm joined as always by my critically rated co-host, Mr. Andy Swift. Andy, how are you doing?
Critically rated. I'm all right, my little sugar ferret. I'm sweating over here because the UK is in apparently a heat wave of an entire 30 degrees of heat. Crazy, I know. Crazy.
What is that in American?
30 degrees.
I'm going to Google it. 30 C in F. That is 86. That is not hot.
No, it's not really. It's not really. But it's enough for us to issue public health warnings.
Yeah. You're coming to DEF CON, right? Actually, by the time this show airs, you will have been to DEF CON. You do know sometimes it gets to 110 or more.
I'm going to melt.
What is 110?
That's got to be 40 something, surely.
43.
43. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to melt. Which should be good. Hopefully, air conditioning. You've invented that, right?
There will be.
Yeah.
That entire city is run by the air conditioning industry. It's not the casino. It's not gambling. It's not the mob. It's just the AC industry. They run Vegas now.
They do. There must be a lot of demand for AC. A bit like flags in your area where you live. I always remember coming to visit you, and down your road, everyone had a flag outside the house, and at the end was a flag store.
That's just America, man. You think Massachusetts is the worst state for that? No. If anything, I feel like Massachusetts is pretty light on flags.
Oh, God. Whereas over here, no one really has flags over here, unless it's some kind of political activist.
Yeah.
It's a weird
it's
thing.
Kind of weird, though, isn't it? I like it. I have a flag outside my house. It's, I don't know, it just seems nice to celebrate one's country. But then again, you don't really have freedom, Swift, do you?
Whoa.
Controversial.
Let's not get into politics. Especially as we're coming up to DEF CON. I don't want to say anything about politics coming up to DEF CON when I've got to get past your border control.
This will air after DEF CON, it'll be fine.
So what are we here to talk about today, in actual fact?
Well, the title of today's episode is Common Vulnerability Scoring Sucks? With a question mark at the end there. We're going to talk about CVSS and why it might not be the best system for rating vulnerabilities, or maybe it is. We're going to figure it out.
We are.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready to dive in.
Good. Well, before we start, this show is made possible thanks to our sponsors. So let's take a moment to tell you who is sponsoring today's episode. This episode is brought to you by Portswigger, makers of Burp Suite and the team rewriting the rules on HTTP request smuggling. 6 years after bringing request smuggling into the spotlight, Portswigger's James Kettle returned to Black Hat and DEF CON with new research exposing how widespread and critical these vulnerabilities remain, even in hardened infrastructure. These aren't isolated bugs, they're systemic flaws hidden beneath CDNs and load balancers, undetectable by traditional scanners. James's latest techniques evade current defenses, revealing new attack vectors and earning over 200k in bounties in just 2 weeks. Upstream HTTP 1.1 still offers huge exploit potential and will continue to do so until it's entirely phased out. Burp Suite gives you the tools and knowledge to probe deeper, find new desync variants, and discover vulnerabilities others cannot. So get out there, tweak your tools, break assumptions, gain an edge. Visit http1mustdie.com and see how you can take your testing and bounties to the next level by joining the fight to kill HTTP1. So, you brought this subject up to me.
I did.
The other day.
Yes.
And then we sort of discussed it via text, and then we were like, let's just do an episode about it.
Yes, you do.
So, what do you want to talk about? CVSS, it's perfect, right?
No. Well, isn't, as we'll find out, I think. I think this is the way the discussion's going to go. Shall we start with what triggered this conversation? Because I found it interesting, and it's an interesting talking point, I think. Because at this time, and yeah, bearing in mind this is probably going to wear months from now, but at this moment in time, not so long ago, last few weeks, there's been a couple of vulnerabilities unearthed in Notepad++ for all those people that love Notepad++ for some reason. In particular,
Okay, hang on.
What got?
Why are we trashing on Notepad++?
Do you not like Notepad++?
No, I do like it.
You do like it.
Yeah.
Why?
I'm saying, why are you trashing on it?
Because I don't like it.
Okay. I don't use it anymore, but I will say when, like, back in the day, before, like, ASM came out, before VS Code came out, I loved Notepad++ on Windows, obviously. And I feel like, yeah, it's lagged a bit behind in development. It's not as cool and hip anymore, but I still like it. And I will not take the disrespect for Notepad++.
Wow. I think
Hashtag not sponsored.
yeah, I think the reason I don't dislike it, I think the reason that I don't particularly use it anymore is probably the same as yours. Just there's other stuff that's just outdeveloped it, outpaced it, and become more sort of prevalent, user friendly, feature rich. With that said, Notepad++. So there's an issue with the installer on it. There's a couple of vulnerabilities unearthed where the installer was part of the problem, as in you can store things to places that you shouldn't, long story short. And what was intriguing about it was it got quite a high CVSS score. It came out with a CVSS base score of 7.3. And the argument that's been rife among social media and interwebs is you've got to be in a kind of privileged position anyway to run an installer with fairly privileged user accounts. And especially if your goal is to pull in and execute other binaries as well, you've got to have quite a high level of privileges to be able to do that successfully as well. Combining all that together, how has it got a 7.3 score? And then you start looking down the list of things. And one of the things I pointed out to you via messaging was, I don't understand how the privileges required section in there got a low rating. So it came out with the privileges required as low, as in, like, you don't really require many privileges to be able to execute. That's my understanding of it anyway. But that metric on its own affects the overall base score considerably. If you mention the fact that you potentially need like an administrator account to even be able to go near executing this stuff to begin with, that would put that up at a high and probably reduce the base score by quite. I haven't actually calculated how much by, but yeah. So this is part of my problem with it, because I think everyone sees slightly different things within the scores and rates them in slightly different ways and uses the different metrics within it in slightly different ways. And I've seen plenty of cases in the past where pen testers have frankly got it wrong or used things like incorrect metrics or rated something completely incorrectly because they don't really understand the metrics behind it. Fairly common. What do you think?
So I actually think you're wrong. And I think most people are wrong. Now, I think the score might be too high, but I don't think privilege required is the actual issue. In fact, and this might be our first point of contention, I would argue the privilege required should be set to none, not high. And I'll tell you why. So let's give some context for this vulnerability. The vulnerability is effectively, or the idea behind the vulnerability is the installer looks for a file or something in the current directory that it's running out of, right? And if that file exists, it will effectively load that file and run it or something. So the idea is if an attacker can basically trick a user into downloading that file, but it's their malicious version, and then convince that user to run the installer, then their malicious file will get run. That's the vulnerability. Effectively, it's not doing proper checking of where the file is, right? It should be checking an absolute path, but instead it just checks the current directory. Now, here's the thing. I'm looking right now at the CVSS version 3.1 calculator on nvd.nist.gov. And if you hover over privileges required low, it gives you a lovely little tooltip which explains what this is. And it says the attacker is authorized with, i.e. requires, privileges that provide basic user capabilities that could normally affect only settings and files owned by the user. Now, I would argue the attacker is not authenticated at all in this scenario. They've tricked a user into downloading a file. They are not authenticated, they are not authorized at all. An attacker, technically, to exploit this, doesn't need any privileges on the system they're attacking. They just need to basically send an email and say, hey, can you download this file? And then run the installer. And so this is where I think it is. I think it's low privileges. However, if I'm looking at the CVE that you've posted in the show notes and the CVSS score, I believe attack complexity is ranked as low, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say this is a high complexity attack. So if we look at complexity, low means specialized access conditions or extenuating circumstances do not exist. An attacker can expect repeatable success against the vulnerable component. I don't think that's true. I think it's high. A successful attack depends on conditions beyond the attacker's control. That's definitely true. It requires on, firstly, the user to download the file that they sent and then download the installer or run the installer. Like, those are at least 3 things that are completely outside the attacker's control at this point.
Right.
So I would say you don't put privilege required to low, you would put it to none, and you would bump the complexity up to high. And actually, let me do that. Let me see what we have. So we get a 7.0 if we do that. So it does go down by 0.3 because originally it was a 7.3. So we do get a 7.0.
So, interestingly, I think we have stumbled across part of a problem with CVSS. It's that no one really agrees on certain things. But we could go on and on about counter arguments to that as well. I mean, like, you send a user a file. If they have no permissions to be able to execute with an installer, then you still require a privilege to be able to get it to execute. But there's a rabbit hole there, isn't there? Of like, you think one thing, I think another. And if I submit a CVSS score with my understanding and my thinking behind it, which is subjective, and you do the same, and we come out with different scores, that's a bit of a problem.
I was going to say, do you need admin permissions to install Notepad++?
It depends on the environment. I mean, most corporate environments, you'd probably argue and probably want something like a group policy in place that would prevent people just installing whatever the hell they like. I mean, some places will just whitelist applications and just go, yeah, Notepad++, absolutely fine. In which case, yeah, of course, you got a problem. So I think that's probably a little bit muddy, to be honest, that it might first appear. Most places will just do a blanket ban on like third-party executables or installers and things and just say standard users don't have permissions to do that. Some will be a bit more granular with it because they might have developers that need to install certain things and such. Yeah, it's a little bit muddy. But I think But
you know what you've hit there, Swift?
Muddy water.
You've hit environmental score metrics is what you're talking about there.
Almost planned, isn't it?
So, like, that's the point, right? I'm fairly certain, like, in Windows at least, you can generally run an installer, and if you're just installing it to a local directory, and I don't know, maybe Notepad++ requires being installed to program files. I would imagine that's not necessarily the case. Like, a lot of things you can install to, like, your local, like, app data, right, on Windows. Like, you can install it locally, you don't need admin permissions, you can just that's the thing. It's just running it's just putting an executable somewhere. So I imagine that might be the case, that you can technically install Notepad++ without admin permissions and group policy and stuff like that. That is so, like, the best word for it, customized, I guess. Like, the point of a base score is it's just like, hey, this is a general overview of the vulnerability. And then if you have specific environmental constraints, which make it worse or better, for lack of a better word, then you can put those on it.
Yeah, it is a good point. And I think CVS...
Wait, hang on. Can you say that again?
It's a good point.
Thank you.
CVSS 4, that's the other thing. So CVSS 4 changes some of these base metrics as well, going into the sort of realms of context of exploitability as well, which I think is probably also fairly relevant to our discussion here around Notepad++ vulnerabilities and things, because the context of how it's exploited and the context of how it's actually run is probably quite important, because as we've discussed, some environments will let you do this, some environments will just not. It's quite heavily dependent, in my opinion, on how well or poorly your environment is configured. And that's going to be a huge variable up and down, like organizations worldwide. And yeah, I don't know if we start this conversation of CVSS 4 now, because we've got in the show notes here a very simple note, but I don't want to swear too much, but basically the general long and short of it is, have you seen CVSS 4? As if to say, my God, it is a mess.
Yes.
So I think with CVSS 3, a lot of 3.1, a lot of people's beef with it was they wanted more context and they wanted more things to be able to explain context around exploitability and stuff like that. And it was demanded and the drum was banged for a very long time. And then CVSS 4 came around and it was sort of like, here's all the goodies you wanted. Here's all the context you'd ever need for anything. And we're like, okay, this is great. Thank you. And then people started using it like we did. We quite quickly, when it came out, a few days later, we built a calculator for it in our reporting system and migrated to sort of dual usage of 3.1 and 4. Guess what happened? No one wanted to use CVSS 4 because they took one look and when they opened the calculator, they went, oh my God. And they looked at all the metrics and things that make up the formula and went, maybe no. And it's an interesting point because it will give you very contextualized scoring output, which is useful, but there's a few counterpoints to that. And I think one of them is probably, as pen testers, do we ever necessarily get all that context we need from a quick pen test? Let's say it's a web application test of like 4 or 5 days. In some cases, I don't know if we're going to get that full context to be able to like comment on absolutely everything within those metrics accurately. And then my other point.
Well, which metrics are you talking about? Environmental?
Both. Because they've expanded on the base metrics, but it's more the environmental, I think, is a bump in the road.
So I made a video recently on CVSS, and one of the points I made in it was pen testers really shouldn't be using environmental metrics at all. Realistically, and a lot of people don't understand that the CVSS score is something that might change over time. The base metrics shouldn't change. They're a really sort of general description of the severity of a vulnerability with no assumptions being made about anything. And then you have the temporal metrics, and we're still talking 3.1 here. The temporal metrics are effectively how a vulnerability might change over time. And that's mostly due to how people respond to it. If a vendor fixes it, then the severity of a vulnerability is going to go down because there's an official fix that you can apply. If a vendor doesn't fix it, but there's some kind of workaround, then the severity will still go down, but not by as much. And then you have the environmental metrics. And so the first two, base metrics and temporal metrics, I think pen testers can definitely handle because pen testers should be able to score base metrics. If you can't, I really worry what you're doing. But they should be able to at least score the base metrics. Temporal metrics are maybe require a little bit of research. They aren't required either. Base metrics are the only metrics required for a CVSS score. But temporal metrics you can put in there if you know that there's a fix, for example. And then environmental generally is for the end user who receives the CVSS score. So as a pen tester, if you give a report to a customer, they look at a CVSS score and it's like a high, right? It's like a 7.6 or something. They might take that CVSS score and apply their own environmental metrics to it and reduce that score. And that's fine. You can do that. You can just do things. You can just apply environmental metrics. And to your point about CVSS 4, I agree. I think it's a lot more complicated. I am looking at the calculator right now. But at the same time, the base metrics really aren't that complicated. They have added 3 because they've split CIA into the vulnerable system and a subsequent system. But you only need to score one of those sections to get a CVSS score. You can score both because sometimes there's a vulnerable system and a subsequent system. But you might just score one. So technically, the number of base metrics required for a CVSS score in version 4 is still 8. It hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And then you have, supplemental metrics, environmental security requirements, and threat metrics. And I think it's just got a little bigger, but none of this is really required. And for pen testers especially, stuff like both of the environmental metrics, like metric groups, I guess, aren't required, I would say. You don't need to use those. And supplemental, maybe in some situations you'll want to use.
Yeah, but then supplemental, the first one on is safety. Really.
Yes.
There's some things in here that are fairly easy for pen testers to comment on, like automatable, for example. But there's lots of other things in here, like value density, vulnerability response effort, provider urgency is another one. It's like there's quite a lot of things in here that your average pen tester is just not going to A, require or need to provide, and B, have the insight to provide. So,
but you don't need to provide them, though.
No. So I think
supplemental metrics are all optional. And I agree with you on safety. Safety, I like it because I understand where they were coming from. They were effectively, what I believe they were doing anyway, was there was a bunch of stories about network connected pacemakers, right? Like Bluetooth connected pacemakers, and the possibility of being able to denial of service them. And I don't know, I might be completely wrong about this. This is only what I've been told. So this is entirely anecdotal. But I believe the whole safety requirement was, okay, but what if there's like a real world impact to this, right? What if this actually impacts what we would generally term health and safety? And I think that's where it is. So like if you can denial of service a pacemaker, that's pretty bad, right?
Yeah. Equally, I imagine it probably applies to things like national critical infrastructure and stuff like SCADA networks and things. Does it impact safety? But yeah, I think safety probably impacts things like the SCADA networks as well, and ICS type stuff too. Yes, again, same thing. Denial of service in those sorts of scenarios is never going to be good. It's never going to result in a good scenario, and yes, can impact safety, but to what extent is, there's a lot of these things, and I think you are right. I don't think most pen testers probably need to stray outside of the base metrics generally. I don't want to say you're right again. But
I think threat metrics, which is the new temporal metrics, they might. That makes sense. So I do like what they've... So, okay, there are a lot of criticisms with CVSS version 4. One of the nice things I think they've done is they've reduced temporal metrics, which was 3 different things, into one thing, which is just exploit maturity. Exploit maturity, I guess. And now it's just one thing, and you can have not defined, attacked, proof of concept, unreported. So I kind of like that.
I really like that. And I'll tell you why I really like that. It's because we include that in our reports now, which is partly why I really like it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because a lot of the big vulnerability scanning tools have also started to import that sort of data as well about, is there a public exploit available? Is it a mature exploit? Can it be found here? Does it have proof of concepts kicking around? Yada, yada, yada. Is it in active use? And I think that's quite important contextually for clients to understand as well when they pick up a report to quantify how bad this is, because a lot of the time we'll be discovering vulnerabilities and it'll be like, oh, vulnerability scanner says bad because this thing exists. And then it turns out it was discovered by an internal team. Let's just say it's a Cisco vulnerability. It's discovered by an internal team at Cisco. No one's ever heard of it. No one's ever exploited it. There's no proof of concept anywhere and no one has any idea how to build one. At that point, it's quite hard to ring the alarm bells about it. Aside from the fact that there's a patch. But yeah, it's context is important, right?
No, not at all.
Love it. Perfect. So
yeah, no, context very important. This might be a controversial opinion. Like obviously CVSS, a lot of what NIST does with CVSS, and they say it quite a few times, is that CVSS doesn't measure risk. It's a measure of severity. Now, I feel like some of these kind of measure risk. I feel like, especially like threat metrics, like the exploitability of something, I feel like kind of sort of shoves risk a little in there. And I feel like not enough people talk about like NIST are always like, oh, and CVSS is a measure of severity, and it's like, okay, but you do have exploit maturity on there, which is kind of like how likely a vulnerability is to be exploited because there's proof of concept code, right? Or it's being attacked. So surely that's because the thing is, and this is not a good definition of risk, but it's a good enough definition of risk. I've always said risk is effectively severity times likelihood, right? If you have a severity of a vulnerability and you multiply it by the likelihood of an exploit, that's the risk. All right. It doesn't always work. Like a low severity vulnerability with a high exploitability or high likelihood of exploitability doesn't mean it's going to be like a high risk. Like it's still probably like low. because it's low severity. Like nobody can do anything with it. But like for a general case, I think it works in a lot of cases. And I feel like temporal metrics always came across to me as more of like, how can we jam risk in here somewhere?
Yeah, it's definitely in there because it was, I've got this screenshot in our notes as well. So when CVSS 4 came out, Qualis did a blog post on it, just identifying some of the differences and things like that and pointing some things out. And they said, this was in the supplemental metric group they were talking about down here. And they said, supplemental metric group aims to provide contextual information that consumers can use to take additional actions that help them in further risk analysis.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a point. I think there is an element of risk scoring in there. I think there has to be in a number of ways to make up a good CVSS score. I think there has to be an element of risk in there. It's not the be all and end all. But I think the underlying point there is these sorts of scores should be used to do some further analysis on and expand upon, so you can, as a customer and a receiver of pen test reports and things, build your own kind of risk analysis based on the reported information we're giving you when you start to add your own metrics into it and expand on those scores. Problem is, no one really does that, but I've noticed. I can't say I've noticed clients who have got, and we put, I don't know if you guys do this or you've done this in previous positions you've been in, but in reports we give CVSS scores alongside all of our usual likelihoods and severities and stuff, as most people do. But we also add in the metrics we've used, the calculations we've used as well, so they can, the idea being, client can pick it up, see them and go, I need to add in my extra bits down here and in theory get a good score out of it. But no one ever tends to do that. And I quite get the vibe that most of the clients don't really understand the formula or care to understand the formula. It's all about the number, the overall base score number, and that's the kind of be all and end all of things.
I agree. Yeah, this is the problem. I don't think people use CVSS properly. Also, just as a side note, I'm now going to refer to all customers as receivers of the pen test report. It sounds so much more mythical. I think we should start a petition. It's awesome. Receivers of the scroll of pen test. I've been
playing a bit of D&D recently, so some of my terminology comes across a bit sort of questy.
It's great. Can we come up with more terms?
Yeah, maybe we'd even do a D&D night based around a pen test report. Who knows? That'd be a wild campaign.
We definitely should. We should play backdoors and breaches at some point.
We should. We turn used to do a gaming podcast again. That's a receiver pen test report. Yeah, I don't think enough people do understand it. And the technical people who are creating the CVSS scores, if we're debating it and we're debating how to use it and we're coming out with different things and different interpretations of environmental aspects to it, then yeah, I imagine the clients are going to as well. That's quite a problem if they just see number and they don't actually understand the metrics and scoring that goes behind it. But in some ways, here's another question. Does it matter? That's a terrible question. Because of course it matters. But I feel broadly that CVSS 3.1 gets the message across perfectly fine. And I think it's part of a reason we haven't seen a mass switch over to CVSS 4 yet, in my opinion. And not to mention all of the vulnerability scanning tools and all of the everywhere that you report a vulnerability to still uses 3.1 en masse. And I don't think they're sort of intending on changing soon. So yeah, I don't think adoption is quite there for CVSS 4.
Yeah, so then this might be because we focus on different areas of pen testing. CVSS 3.1, I think, is probably fine if you're talking sort of network-based attacks. And if you're talking about, getting a shell on a computer via some kind of network exploit. Where I think it's, and I'm talking from a position of web app testing and web servers and browsers and everything. It fails miserably when it comes to web applications. And I think I cover this in the video as well. So part of the base metric is CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. You rank them, make sure I'm saying this right, either none, low, or high.
Yes.
Right? Now, high, let's just take confidentiality because they're all kind of similar in terms of what these ratings means. So high means there's a total loss of confidentiality resulting in all resources, with the impacted component being divulged to the attacker. All right. And then it says, alternatively, access to only some restricted information is obtained, but the disclosed information presents a direct serious impact. And low is there is some loss of confidentiality. Access to some restricted information is attained, but the attacker does not have control over what information is contained, or the amount or kind of loss is constrained. This can get, so it does kind of work, but I feel like a lot of people, especially when they read the high one, in the context of, let's just say, an SQL injection, I would argue, is definitely high confidentiality, like in impact. But there's some argument that by the definitions here, it's only low. And I don't feel like it does enough to kind of state that, okay, actually, you can't access all the files, right? You can't access all the resources. And you might not be able to access all the tables in the database, right? You might not have admin access to a database, but you might still have access to several tables or even just one table of information. And is that high or is that low? I would argue high, but I don't think the definitions really align with that much. So I think what CVSS 4 does is I think it clarifies that a little bit more. And that's where CVSS 4 might be better, especially with user interaction. User interaction is another one. Previously in CVSS version 3 or 3.1, user interaction had none and required. And that was always tricky because is a persistent cross-site scripting vulnerability where it's stored in the website, where literally anyone can click around the website, and if they click on the right page by mistake, is that a user interaction? And I've always argued no. I feel like a user interaction should be purposeful. Like they have to be doing something purposeful as part of the attack, right? They have to be sort of unwilling, tricked in some way. They have to run the exploit. They have to click on a specific page that they've been told to click on, right? Or specific link, I should say. And that was always a point of contention because a lot of people would say, actually, no, that's required. Like the user literally has to click on something. And it's like, yeah, but they're clicking on it as if it's a normal action. Like they could just be clicking around the website like they normally use it every single day and instantly get exploited. And version 4 fixes that because it has a new option, which is passive, which is exactly what we needed.
Spot on.
We needed passive means okay, so there is technically some user interaction. They have to be doing something. You can't just fire the exploit away as an attacker and it just works. But passive is basically, okay, they're just doing something like they normally would and it triggers the exploit. That's good. I like that. I like that about CVSS version 4.
Yeah, and that's partly the reason why I got very excited about it when it came out, because it sort of answered all of the problems that we had with, especially with various metrics in 3.1 that do just have 2 inputs to them. It doesn't really give you enough options in some cases. Yeah, I think in summary, CVSS 4 is good. I like it. I like it a lot. I think the problem is I think the main problem is in people's use cases of it and the interaction between pen tester and client, or receivers of the reports, as we're now calling them. And I think that's the big area that it comes down to is CVSS 4 for us, I think would work a lot better because it gives us many more options to be way more accurate in terms of our base scoring output. And I think the misunderstanding that a lot of clients have out there, receivers of reports have out there, is that they don't need to do anything on top of that score, and that score is just it. That's what it's been assigned, and they don't need to apply anything over the top. So I think a big part of this probably needs to be more on the client education side of it and how they're receiving and how they're using CVSS scores. If your vulnerability tools, your vulnerability scanning tools, your pen test, whatever it is giving you a CVSS score reported back of something, always go back and just check and apply all of your own metrics over the top, like your environmental stuff and anything that hasn't been applied. Because chances are most of those things are just giving you a base score anyway, which is not going to be contextual to you. It's not going to have any extra information that might change that score for the better or for the worse, to be honest. So yeah, I think that vital sort of link in the chain of people taking those scores, adopting them and putting their own stamp on them and really understanding their makeup is missing.
Yeah. Should pen test consultancies do more to help in that regard, though? Because I feel like a lot of the time, the key concern with receivers of the report is the fact that they have to give the pen test report to their customers. Like maybe Like they've been demanded, hey, have you got a pen test of this? Can we see the pen test report? And if you just give a pen test report to one of your customers who like has a bunch of highs in it, but the highs are all contextually technically mediums for various environmental reasons, like that's important. That kind of sucks as a customer to do that. So, and like, I imagine most pen test consultancies work like this. I think all the ones I have worked like this. If a customer comes back and complains about the way something was scored, we'll hear them out for sure. If they present a decent argument, then we can certainly agree, okay, actually, yeah, you've presented a good argument there. We probably scored this one incorrectly. We'll lower it. And some customers ask for it to be higher, to be honest. Like some customers have come back to us and say, yeah, you rank this as a medium, but can you put it as a high so we actually make sure that the devs fix it? And we're like, sure. Okay, cool. I love those. I love those customers. They're great. But I feel like maybe it should be that part of going over the readout call of the report should be explaining, hey, if you guys have environmental metrics that you want to add to any of these, then, give us them and we can apply those to the final report. The one problem I see with that is that, okay, well, what if customers just give like the maximal environmental metrics that will lower absolutely everything, right?
Yeah.
They'll be like, you have to like this, we want to apply this, and suddenly all the scores go down to like low threes. And you're like, okay. So the problem is, I think customers don't understand or can't or won't understand the base metrics that we see them, and we can't understand their environmental metrics sometimes. There's that disconnect. So I think it works in theory, but maybe not in practice.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make, because I think every pen testing company gets those kind of clients coming back to them and going, look, don't think your scoring's quite right here, and we think it is. But the core thing we're missing, of course, is their context behind it and any other sort of things they haven't told us about that might remediate the issue somewhat. So in a sense, they're doing that part of the CVSS scoring that we want them to do anyway, the other half of it, without knowing it or actively going out and doing it themselves. So I think we need to, as pen testing companies, be open to that kind of stuff and welcome that kind of feedback and not be like, oh, they're judging us. Like, there are genuinely stuff that we don't know when we test an application in terms of context and things like remedial actions and stuff they might have in place behind the scenes that completely nullify our vulnerability. There are cases where that happens. And yeah, I think if you're not doing those sort of wash-up calls where you do have those kind of opportunities and welcome the client in to comment or discuss the CVSS scores with you or the severities even with you that you've applied, I think you're missing a trick, because it's got to be right for them at the end of the day. I will say, though, to your point about they could just say anything, you got to qualify what they're saying, and there's got to be evidenced in some way, shape or form. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Sometimes they can evidence things like settings and stuff like that. They can screenshot things, they can send you configs of stuff, and you can go, oh yeah. Sometimes you can even retest things and go, yep, okay, point proven, take your point. I can't get out of that sandbox, whatever it may be. Sometimes you can qualify it like that, and I think where you can, every opportunity to be taken. I wouldn't just take them face value and just go, oh yeah, your environment's perfect behind the scenes, it seems. No vulnerabilities here. Glad I took your word for it.
Yes, everything requires physical access.
Yeah. Oh, what a shame. No internet connectivity at all here. Nothing to see.
I just love that. Like, if they came back and say, "Yeah, can you mark the access vector as physical only?" And I'm like, but I connected to your web app over the internet. And then no, physical only.
Yeah, someone has to go and move the Ethernet cable.
Okay,
that's what it was. Makes no sense. So yeah, we've got to be careful about opening ourselves up to that kind of storm. But yeah, at the same time, as long as you're validating it, I think that kind of relationship with a client is so important, and it's what keeps clients coming back to you. End of the day, is if you do have that in-depth discussion with them about what you think. If you're just telling them this is the be-all and end-all, then that's a problem. If you're just dictating what you see from your very narrow perspective of base vector scoring, you can't dictate from that position. It needs to be a two-way conversation. There's two people. There's two ends of a spectrum that come together. There's the people that built it and configure it and run it every day, and the people that are testing it and breaking into it. And yeah, to be able to give a good overall risk score, funnily enough, to it out the back of all of this, you need all of that information from both sides. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Agreed.
Bosh.
We've solved CVSS.
I know, you're welcome, Internet. That's another one done.
So it turns out colon vulnerability scoring doesn't suck.
No.
It just requires a lot of context.
Yes.
And maybe CVSS 4 provides that, and maybe it doesn't. And we'll see. Going forward, I feel like the problem is CVSS 4 isn't it. It's the next thing. We're going to go to it at some point. I know we haven't really mentioned EPSS, and every time I bring up CVSS in a video or on Twitter, people are like, "What about EPSS?" And I'm like, I don't use EPSS. I probably should read into it more. Maybe we can do an episode on EPSS once we've actually read on it. Maybe people in the comments will be like, yeah, EPSS is better. I don't know. It might be. But I feel like it probably isn't, just because hardly anyone seems to actually be using it.
So I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually, is that it might well be better technically, but if no one's using it, is it actually better for the overall goal of all of this stuff is to develop a risk register, almost to put it in kind of a chronological order about what you should fix first, what your priorities should be, and this is bad, fix it, and this is not so bad, you can leave this for another time, sort of thing, coming off the back of a report. So if the overall goal is to give something a score that rings alarm bells, it better be something that everybody understands and is globally accepted. Like, I think that's part of the other reason why 4 hasn't picked off so much, is because literally everywhere uses 3.1. All the way from like your Qualys scanners to your PCI stuff, all the way through to Nessus vulnerability scanning, yada, yada, yada. Everything uses it. So it's quite hard to break that mold, because some of the different metrics you use can change the base score quite dramatically between the versions. If everyone's using the same thing, at least you have that sort of baseline of predictability. And I think if you go, yeah, EPSS might be better, but if no one's using it, is a client just going to pick up and go, what on earth is this? I don't understand this, therefore I shall ignore it. Possibly.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
We should do another episode on it, I think, because it is interesting.
We should. Do you have anything to add to this episode?
I have no more to add to this episode other than be kind to your pen testers, form a relationship with them, give a pen tester a hug, and maybe we can make CVSS a better place overall. Because I genuinely don't think the formulas are broken at all between CVSS 3 and CVSS 4. I think it's generally people's misuse of it and the common conception that it's the offensive end that should be providing all of the detail for the metrics that go into it. So if those things change, I think we're in actually a glorious place. It's maybe not as broken as people make it out to be. It's more of the use cases and people that are broken, as with so many things.
Well, thank you all for listening. I've been Tib3rius. He's been Andy Swift. This has been Across the Pondcast. You can find all of our social media links in the episode description or on acrossthepondcast.net. And we will see you next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks once again to our sponsor this episode, Portswigger. Remember to visit http1mustdie.com and join the fight to kill HTTP1.